Good afternoon. Welcome to today's virtual education on obesity and cancer. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes to join, and then we will begin the webinar. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started right at noon. We have a packed information for you today. So again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Erin Dunn, and I'm an Oncology Outreach Coordinator with the Samaritan Cancer Resource Center. We're so excited for today's webinar on the topic of obesity and cancer. Next slide, please. We just have a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are using a universal mute button, so please use the chat box at the top right corner to ask any questions. We'll be monitoring this chat box throughout the presentation, and as time allows, we will answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded. A recording will be available to view on the Samaritan Health Services YouTube channel at a later date. Next slide. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker for today. So Dr. Erika La Vella is a board-certified bariatric surgeon who cares for surgical patients with obesity. Dr. La Vella received her undergraduate degree from the University of Idaho and medical education at Pacific Northwest University of Health Sciences College of Osteopathic Medicine. Following her internship and residency at Good Samaritan Regional Medical Center. In her spare time, she lectures and teaches on the important implications of human gut microbiome health. Without further ado, I would love to welcome Dr. Erika La Vella.
Thank you, Erin. So this is going to be an activity awarded for CME credit. If you are in the healthcare field, all you have to go to eads.com and type in password 79wood. And this is my disclosure. Nothing that I disclose or talk about today is, I don't have any conflicts of interest with microbiome literature or any relevant financial relationships to commercial entities. In fact, there will be zero commercial entity talk unless, of course, you guys start asking me questions about stool testing. So I'm going to jump right in. I am a total nerd when it comes to my infatuation with the human gut microbiome. And this is one of my favorite infographics that really just puts it into perspective. We are covered with trillions of microorganisms. They live on our skin, they live in our hair, they live in our mouth, our entire digestive tract, our bladder, our vagina. I mean, they're literally everywhere. And the fascinating thing to me is that we are more bacteria than we are even human in terms of the weight or the proportion of genetic information that's constantly mutating and evolving. The bacteria are really replicating. They're interacting with viruses, and what the bacteria are up to has a huge impact on us as humans in terms of our health. If we were to look at the surface area of the human GI tract and stretch it out, it's folded up really tightly at the microscopic level. And we stretch it out, it's as big as 2 tennis courts. And so that just puts into perspective for you, again, the surface area and like how intensely your body is constantly working for you. It's estimated that if we were to take all the bacteria out of our body and line them up end to end, it would wrap around the earth 2.5 times. And that all of us are as unique to our individual gut microbiome as we are as our fingerprint. And that little fun fact for you really speaks to why there's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to diet, lifestyle, genetic predisposition. We are all so unique. And so today we're going to talk largely about the larger perspective of how these microorganisms are constantly interacting with us as a host in the context of cancer, in the context of obesity. And I mentioned stress because stress is one of the biggest insults to disrupting the human gut microbiome, and why I think it's a really important aspect to discuss not just diet, not just lifestyle, not just exercise, but also our stress response, because that is something that is also as unique to us as our own fingerprints. Oh, and viruses. Oh my gosh. So all of the literature to date is largely about bacteria. And it is known that there are viruses in the human GI tract as well. Not all bad viruses, but actually some good ones. And they have this amazing ability to interact with our bacteria, share genetic information with bacteria, and help our bacteria evolve, sometimes for health and sometimes for disease. So in the future, I think we're going to see a huge revolution in terms of our ability to analyze that data about how viruses are interacting with our bodies even further. So the obesity and cancer link has been surmised here into a couple of mechanisms. And those mechanisms are related to subclinical chronic low-grade inflammation and oxidative stress. Now, if you aren't a healthcare provider and maybe more of a layperson, inflammation is as simple as the red, hot, swollen, kind of painful feeling that happens when we stub our toe or accidentally cut ourselves. That is what inflammation is. The same cell types that rush to that part of the body to heal that part of the body are also involved in systemic inflammation throughout the body. Oxidative stress is related to pH, alkalinity, and the presence of free radicals. Altered gut microbiome contributes to inflammation and release of carcinogenic products. Honestly, this isn't much different than inflammation and oxidative stress, but it is acknowledged that when the gut microbiome is disturbed, the gut bacteria themselves produce these inflammatory chemicals, and they can release these pro-cancer causing chemicals. And then microenvironmental changes, perturbations, meaning not favorable changes, and circadian rhythm disruptions are additional mechanisms. And what they mean by microenvironmental perturbations is something as simple as a conditional ailment. So that could be something in our external environment, like maybe you move to a new location and now there's some sort of new chemical or toxin in the air, in the water that you're being subject to. Maybe you get something as simple as a urinary tract infection, and now you have local inflammation there and you're taking systemic antibiotics to treat that, but then there's a systemic effect and the downstream effect isn't always favorable. Circadian rhythm implies to how well are we sleeping? How well are we waking? What is our energy balance that regulates sleep and awakeness? And there has been study after study suggesting that being awake at night and eating at night are leading to, or what we call obesogenic by nature. So our bodies are supposed to be fasting at night, they're supposed to be sleeping at night, and all of our biology is geared towards repairing at night. So if we don't have deep sleep, if we don't go through REM, if we don't have paralysis, it disrupts all of these things. Gut bacteria know it, your heart knows it, your brain knows it. And what we have is obesity and then insulin resistance. And it's actually believed that insulin resistance is even more important than obesity itself. Plenty of people are walking around carrying a little excess weight, but don't have insulin resistance and don't necessarily have these pro-cancer, pro-inflammatory chemicals circulating through their body. And then inflammatory adipokines. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what an adipokine is. So again, if you aren't clinical, you might not know what a cytokine is, but a cytokine became very well known in the news recently because of the coronavirus. So a cytokine is a chemical, specifically here in this little green box, tumor necrosis factor A, the TNF-A, the IL-6, the IL-8. These are chemicals produced by your immune system when your immune system needs to react aggressively to try to fight something. And so they are inflammatory, meaning they do break open blood vessels. They do break open cells so that your army, if you will, can go and protect you. So it turns out that the more adipose tissue we have, the more heightened or activated sometimes this inflammatory cascade can be in our fat cells, and they are referring to that as adipokines. This slide really summarizes the entire talk, and I know it's going to look a little busy, but we're going to slowly break it down and break down how connected is the gut and the gut microbiome with all of these factors. So the microbes in our body crosstalk, and this word crosstalk means that the bacteria themselves signal. It's their language. They release other cytokines, chemokines. Again, that's just the scientific word for this language, this chemical language. Think of it as like a hormone that then respond or is tissue specific or is other bacteria specific. And so starting here on the left side of the screen, we have a prebiotic. And we'll be talking later about what a prebiotic is, but this is a food that feeds bacteria. A prebiotic is a fiber-rich food. Onions, leeks, asparagus, artichokes, those are some of the most potent prebiotic foods out there. Garlic. So every time you eat those, I want you to feel really good. Then we have bacteria, and this is inside the intestine, and these little pink things here, those represent intestine cells. Then we have bacteria who then degrade, eat, consume that fiber. What they release, and these are again those byproducts, we call them byproducts of fermentation. They're also referred to as metabolites, but I like to think of this as what the bacteria poop out, what the bacteria are then fertilizing us with, what their manure is. So kind of think about those natural systems at large. We see a cow eat grass, we then take their manure, we then add it to our compost, we then put that compost on our garden. That is the same chemical process. That's what's going on here inside of us. These bacteria are then making these are the three main ones. I'm sure in 5-10 years time, there are going to be tons more that we scientifically discover. But butyrate, acetate, and propionate are the three most common short-chain fatty acids that are proven to have a beneficial relationship in a specific balance for us, the host. Butyrate specifically is notorious for causing, when butyrate isn't around, leading to colon cancer. You have to eat fiber, you have to have bacteria have to make butyrate. Butyrate is also a special substance because our colon cells depend on butyrate for energy. So you may or may not be familiar with cellular metabolism. It's one of my favorite subjects. But in order for a human to have energy, we have to consume food. And if you've ever been an athlete training for an event, you know that when you reach a certain point of not having any fuel on board, all you have to do is drink or maybe consume maybe a little bit of sugar, like a banana. Banana is a perfect source of fuel when you're exercising. So by eating that banana, you're then getting an intake of those sugars in the banana, and then all of a sudden you have energy. That energy in the body is called ATP. So butyrate is the energy source, the fuel source for our colon cells. And when our colon cells are deprived of butyrate, that is when colon cancer can be more promoted. And I'll talk a little more later about all the wonderful things that butyrate does to the body. So have no fear, we'll talk about butyrate again. What this diagram is showing is what happens beyond the intestinal barrier. So what happens when these byproducts are then absorbed across the intestine. You have good things that can happen and you have bad things that can happen depending on the balance here of these short chain fatty acids. So we have an immune response that happens based on the gut level. And these ILs and these TGs and these IFNs, these are more cytokines. And these TH cells, those are immune cells. You keep coming over here. We have the capacity to reduce inflammation by having the appropriate levels of these short chain fatty acids. We have a capacity to prevent kidney disease or potentially cause kidney disease, depending on the proportion of these short chain fatty acids. We have the capacity to increase our mineral absorption, depending on how healthy our gut barrier is, etc. We also down here on the bottom have the capacity to prevent infection, colitis, enteritis, C. diff, things like that. We also have an impact here on satiety. Satiety is where my work comes in terms of obesity. Satiety is a hormonal response that tells you you are satisfied from food and you either aren't hungry or you can put down that fork and move on. We also have the capacity to maintain barrier function, and I'll be talking about barrier function a little bit later because barrier function is one of the most important ways that you can modulate your first line of defense. You want a really healthy gut barrier. If the gut barrier is intact, just like an intact blood-brain barrier, then you have much less risk of chronic inflammatory diseases that affect every single organ system. Right here, reduced cancer risk. And that is because of all of these different short chain fatty acids that then communicate and crosstalk with all these other systems so that you are protected. You're protected from your own stress response. You're protected from that microenvironmental perturbation when you have contact with something that is deemed harmful for you. So I hope this, in a nutshell, kind of summarizes where we're going. And now I'm going to do my best to break it down. Butyrate, love butyrate. So bacteria seem to control calorie uptake from food. This has been demonstrated time and time again in rat studies. The reason rat studies are helpful in learning these mechanisms between bacteria is because we can, in the research setting, clone or at least make genetically similar rats and then control all their environmental conditions. It's really hard to study these things individually in humans because we're all exposed to those microenvironmental perturbations, and also our genetic ancestry is much different, our birth history is much different. It is quite challenging to study this in humans. There has been, however, observations that people who get a fecal transplant for treatment of C. diff infections, if they accept a stool donor from a lean person, then even overweight individuals seem to have an easier time losing weight. If they accept a stool transplant from an overweight person or a person with obesity, then those people end up gaining weight, oftentimes without any effort or even trying to change their diet. It can be quite distressing when humans gain weight all of a sudden, right? We see that sometimes in menopause and in other stages of life. So bacteria seem to control weight. Food choices, however, are also incredibly important. Food choices feed beneficial bacteria. Bacteria have only evolved to know and accept soil-borne plants. And I'll say that again, soil-borne plants. Plant-based diets have been proven to be the most beneficial for fostering this low inflammatory gut barrier mechanism of keeping us really healthy with a thriving internal ecosystem. Bad bacteria, and I say bad with quotes because what one bacteria species might do to me could have a totally different effect on what it does to somebody else. It's not individual bacteria, it's how bacteria behave as populations. That's also very difficult, but also very intriguing to study and to look at. So when we have these, more or less bad bacteria, then they create more inflammation, and then they can disrupt those hormones of metabolism. Bacteria and genetics are inheritable, and this comes into play from mother. And if you, again, may or may not know this, but genetically, we inherit most of our genetic information from our mother in terms of our mitochondria. Mitochondria is a very specific cell type, or it's called an organelle, but it's a function of each cell in the body. And it has its own DNA, and it has its own ability to generate energy in our body. That energy equation, that ATP thing I was just describing, the mitochondria does it. We inherit mother mitochondria. So all of the energy regulation in the body is really linked into these maternal lines. The other really cool thing about mothers is we carry babies. And while we are pregnant with our babies, we also share our microbiome with our babies. So bacteria are inheritable through this way. Genetics are inheritable through this way. And then we see this very important transgenerational effect on metabolic diseases. Early life events shape or alter our susceptibility to disease. And this has been tracked in animals and in humans, studied observationally. What I mean by an early life event is how were you born? What events happened to your mother? Stress? What stressed you out as a young child or as an infant? What stressed your mother out when she was pregnant with you? All of these things can impact very quickly how the genetics and how cells are then copied, what happens. All cancers are now linked to disturbances in the gut microbiome. All right, do you believe in the mind-body connection? The gut-brain axis tells us that everything is connected, and we're gonna talk about that. So how I got so infatuated with the gut microbiome is because when I was in medical school, I had some serious gut problems. And I ended up finding a functional medicine provider who tested my stool, tested a bunch of my metabolic markers and functions, and I was really inflamed, making zero serotonin. Serotonin is our happiness and wellness hormone. Turns out I was making none of it. And I had a gut parasite, I had yeast overgrowth, and I had another condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So needless to say, my guts were a mess. I was so close to dropping out of medical school. I felt awful. I felt consumed. I felt really stressed. I did not feel like myself. And the stress of medical school compounded with the actual gut bad organisms being present in my body were really taking its toll. And I'm happy to say I'm fully recovered. But most of the research that I'm going to be sharing with you today wasn't yet published or available. So since my experience, I keep learning and reading the literature and applying it to my own experience. And tell you what, it is a real phenomenon. Your brain and your gut are so intimately connected. So there are many windows of opportunity, again, to have a healthy and thriving microbiome or to potentially cause these conditional disturbances in it. And I think it's important, whether you're learning this information for yourself, but absolutely if you want to have a family someday, absolutely if you want to provide care for other people in the capacity of being a doctor or a dietitian, learning how to set up a microbiome and to recover a healthy microbiome are really going to be the mainstays of our preventative treatment. So your mother's microbiome, birth mode. Like I said, if you're born C-section, you do not make contact with the lactobacillus and the bifidobacterium that inhabit the vagina. You don't make contact with the E. coli. It's actually important that we have E. coli. It lives in the human colon. from being born vaginally. Instead, when you're born by C-section, your first inoculation or seeding, if you will, of bacteria come from skin organisms, which is more like Streptococcus and Staph. And so it can just change at the drop of a hat the expectation of the immune system of what's supposed to happen. Early childhood is an incredibly vulnerable developmental time, depending on what we are fed, breastfed, not breastfed, quality of our food, fast food, sugar, artificial coloring. I mean, we can kind of go on and on. I think people generally understand what good food is. I'm representing it here. Food that comes right out of the ground. Most of your probiotic organisms are actually growing right here on the root system in the soil. And ones that have vibrant colors. Exposures to stressful stimuli and adverse childhood experiences shape our stress response for the rest of our lives. And I'll talk a little bit briefly about that. The other thing is, what is our digestive capacity and what are we eating throughout lifetime? I mentioned stress, and we'll talk about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is the part of your body that is automatically performed. And this is where the gut and the brain are really well connected, is through the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve connects to our stomach, to our intestines, to our colon, to our heart, to our vocal cords, to all the muscles in my face. And so as a human, we have this ability to either portray calmness and reciprocate calmness from seeing each other. And we also have the ability to turn it off sometimes, like with our thoughts or by hearing a loud noise. So being in this digestive state, which is I am calm, I am relaxed, I am sitting, is really important to let your bacteria and your body, your digestive enzymes, your gut barrier function know what is supposed to be happening. If our bodies think we're supposed to be running from a lion, tiger, or bear, then we aren't going to be digesting our food appropriately. So I advocate, don't eat while stressed, don't eat while standing, don't eat while driving. Be very intentional and mindful about when and how you're eating, and you will see a dramatic improvement in your gut function. Use of medications that damage the microbiome and the gut barrier. Those are medications like antacids. Those are medications like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Pain medication, like can cause constipation. All of these things have internal effects that really kind of damage these sort of barriers to improved gut function. And then stress. And I am going to keep talking about stress this whole time. So microbiota refers to microorganisms that inhabit a defined environment, and that's everything from viruses to bacteria to archaea and lower eukaryotes. And again, it's only considered a parasite if it's bad or if it shouldn't be there, but we have lots of organisms that live inside our bodies. The microbiome, which is what I'm so excited about, is how these microorganisms and their genetic function interact with the surrounding environmental conditions. So that's why this thing is complicated. That's why this thing needs this kind of big picture view. And also we need to zoom in on all the individual little components. And then metabolomics, which is how we're learning more and more about these individual niches and ecosystems, you know, how the microbiome in the colon is different than the microbiome in the stomach. We're learning this because of analysis of those metabolites, the short chain fatty acids, in or on those tissue sites. So this is a new and exciting field of microbiome work. And then metatranscriptomics. So again, coronavirus put RNA hopefully on the map, but RNA is a piece of genetic information, and science can now study the RNA provided from these clusters and populations of bacteria, and RNA helps provide information regarding function and growth and regulation of both bacteria and tissue sites. So we have evolved from bacteria bacteria. They are our oldest living ancestors on this planet, and they inhabit our body fully. In fact, some microbiologists even argue that our thoughts might not even be our own. They might actually be these, group collective consciousness of these microorganisms that inhabit us. This is speaking to the endosymbiotic theory. And this here, if you can see my cursor, is the mitochondria. So the theory is that ancient bacteria, aerobic, meaning once oxygen became really prevalent on the planet, that's when life formed on the planet, bacteria started swallowing each other or enveloping each other. And that's how we got more and more complex, is that different populations of bacteria would then mutate and evolve and change. And that's how we got this divergence between plants and then animals and fungi. And so this is kind of the common belief here, endosymbiotic theory about evolution on the planet. So now we'll talk about the human. So, like I said, we really get seeded the first time in utero by what's going on with mom. So if mom has a dental infection or a cavity, if mom gets a urinary tract infection or a yeast infection, if mom has domestic abuse and experiences a lot of stress and adversity, if she gets, toxemia or high blood pressure during pregnancy, all of these things put added risk on the fetus. And in fact, it used to be believed that the amniotic environment was sterile and that no bacteria were in there. But now it's estimated that at least 50% of American-born babies have amniotic fluid with microorganisms in it. So these have been some longitudinal observational studies. Jeffcoat in 2003 cited that there's a 2 to 7 times increased risk of preterm birth if periodontal disease is present in the mother. The amniotic fluid has been found to have both oral, urogenital, and gut microbes in it, which is pretty nuts or fascinating, however you want to think about it. And then there's many other factors then beyond birth. So mode of delivery. Was that baby born by vaginal delivery? Was she born by C-section? How old were they? So the age of the baby actually determines how well they're able to nurse, what sort of function do they have, and then also do they need formula or are they tube fed? So all these factors are really important. And then once they're born, the type of feeding that they get, human breast milk is pretty magical. Mother probiotic bacteria are found in the breast milk. The breast milk changes developmentally. So week 1, week 2, week 3, 2 months, 3 months, every day it's different. It actually changes to meet the needs, the nutritional needs of the developmental stage of the baby. Colostrum, there's immune globulins, there's so many benefits, and there's just not a single formula on the market that can even pretend to make up the difference. Geographical location, so our environment, who's our family members? Do we have animals in the house? What is our exposure to outside? Your microbiome is different if you were born in a hospital or born at home. It's different if you were exposed to dogs and wildlife, all of these things. In fact, there's been an association that if you have a dog in the house, a dog that's indoor-outdoor, your risk of seasonal and food allergies goes down significantly. Remember, allergies is one of those first kind of immune responses that our internal gut environment kind of dictates. Definitely maternal diet. If mom's eating nothing but McDonald's and chips and soda, then her breast milk probably isn't going to be the best. So, we do have to, as providers or as community members, recognize that this isn't a perfect process. And then weaning. So when that child is then weaned from milk and then goes to eat real food, again, are they eating sugary cereal or are they eating more wholesome whole foods? And all of these things matter greatly. It's believed that between ages 3 and 5, your individual microbiome has been seeded and will always try to come back to that sort of baseline constellation, if you will, of those individual populations. And that throughout life, especially as we get older, there's changes that happen to our microbiome where we become less diverse in terms of the organisms that decide to live in our bodies. And again, I don't have a lot of answers or comments on that other than it's just observed that you're born growing these microbiome populations. You live most of your adult life trying to maintain balance with those. And then as we start aging, the acidity in our stomach starts to wane, our bacterial populations start to die off, and who knows, but it is definitely a quality of aging. This was a paper that came out just this year or last year in 2020, but it was a large population study, and they looked at children born by cesarean section between the years of, I think, 46 to 1948. Thousands of children were studied in this longitudinally. This is an NIH study. And what they found is that being born by C-section increased your risk of type 2 diabetes by 46%. Which is just wild to me. And this contrasted obesity because your risk of obesity being born by C-section was only 16%. So again, this speaks to the underlying mechanisms of inflammation often are because of our inability to regulate our blood sugar and insulin resistance as being one of those easily detectable kind of derangements of our metabolism. So the gut is considered the second brain, and it's considered the second brain because it has just as many neurons, if not more neurons, than our actual brain. It also has the same types of cells, so glial cells, microglial cells. There's, neurons, actual neurons, nerve cells are in the gut connecting everything that's going on in that intestinal lumen, that really busy picture, to our central nervous system. We also have the largest collection of lymph nodes in the body right here in the gut. And that, makes sense if you guys are in the cancer world. Breast cancer, we do a sentinel lymph node biopsy. Melanoma, we do a sentinel lymph node biopsy. Colon cancer, we have to take more lymph nodes with the surgical specimen in order to ensure that we have a good result. So most of our cancer language does imply traveling through the lymphatic system. Your gut has the highest collection, highest density of lymph nodes in the body. It is very intimately connected with your lymphatic and immune system. So this is just another picture to kind of put it out there for you. But again, the vagus nerve, which is the nerve that connects brain processes to all of our organ processes, it is a 2-lane superhighway. So for every nerve that goes from brain to gut, there are 9 nerves going from the gut or the organs back up to the brain. And so kind of the joke here, the take-home point is that your guts have a lot to say. And so we need to really understand the mechanisms here at play so that we can be optimized to take better care of them. The other fun fact for you is just that serotonin. Remember I told you when I was in medical school and I had all these GI issues and I felt rather apathetic, felt rather anxious, felt rather depressed, felt like I couldn't really make it. 90% of your serotonin, and estimated even more, but is made by gut bacteria. It's not really made by the brain at all. So in order to grow these healthy hormonal relationships of well-being and foster good nervous system function, good resiliency to stress, which I'm very capable of being resilient to stress now, we need to really pay attention here to how do we help our guts out. Like I said, the vagus nerve is this 2-lane superhighway carrying information from the gut to the brain and from the brain to the gut. The autonomic nervous key features are to keep us alive. So your heartbeat, your respiratory rate, all the things you don't have to think about, digestion, reproduction, ovulation, making urine, all of these things are functions of your autonomic nervous system. The other aspect to this is your autonomic nervous system is part of your sensory system. So your eyes, your ears, your voice, touch, all of these things are connected. They're also connected to all of our organs because, again, we're just constantly taking information from our environment and our bodies are constantly processing this information. So to alert our bodies to danger, hearing a loud noise, seeing a predator, etc. And then for a moment, I want you to reflect on those adverse childhood experiences when you're a young person that can't fully understand the world around them. Abandonment, abuse, etc. There is a aspect to our brain and to our nervous system that can then get wired or triggered to feel unsafe. And our ability to feel unsafe affects our ability to regulate stress. And when we are more prone to stress, we are significantly compromising our gut function, our gut microbiome, and etc. So this is your autonomic nervous system. This is the role of your vagus nerve. And this is the role that we have that I think is equally as important as our ability to choose to eat whole foods, is to also learn about your body, learn about your stress response, and try to bring your body back to a state of safety and balance. Hormesis is a concept used oftentimes to reference drugs or medications. And it's just that at a certain dose of something, there seems to be a benefit. And stress is one of those things. Cortisol is an example of our stress hormone. And this is where circadian rhythms kind of comes into play too, because cortisol will naturally rise at 2 different time points in the day to help give us energy. One time being, really early in the morning. That's what helps bring us to arousal so that we can wake up and get out of bed and go about our day. Another time is kind of in the afternoon or early evening, just to also keep us engaged and keep us going. So that's one example. But in the state of stress, what can happen is cortisol gets overproduced, or it gets produced at the wrong time. And then while it can be beneficial in these low forms, it can be toxic in these abnormal times and at these abnormal doses. This is what our nervous system is constantly kind of juggling, and it takes awareness to our body to bring ourselves in and out of balance. In terms of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is designed to help you digest your food and feel connected, our sympathetic nervous system is designed to help us exercise, stay engaged, stay focused, do work, be physical in our bodies. But if we have too much sympathetic nervous system tone, then we have almost too much cortisol, too much adrenaline. We are running from a lion, tiger, or bear. If we have too much parasympathetic tone, this is where the word vagal comes into play. We can faint, we can pass out. Our heart rate can slow to almost zero. Our blood pressure can bottom out. And so as the human experience, we have capacity to do all of these things. And again, why is this related to gut health? Because your gut bacteria in your nervous system, in your hormones, they're all listening. How do they listen? Well, it's called the gut connectome. And so this is the nervous system of the gut. This here, enteric glial cell, this is one of those nervous cells. And then this is a neuron. Don't worry about afferent here. EEC stands for enterochromaffin cell, which means this is a cell that is sensitive to and responsive to that serotonin made by gut bacteria. And this is called the neuropod. It's really neat. It's like a little antenna, and it'll reach up into the lumen and reach down and connect all of those chemicals, those cytokines, adipokines, etc., those byproducts of bacterial metabolism. It'll connect favorable or unfavorable back to the brain. And again, this fight or flight mechanism, say we experience some stress. I'm trying to think what was the most stressful thing for me lately. my toddler having a tantrum. I don't know why, it just always kind of stresses me out. I want her to stop. I want her to feel calm. I want to be there for her, but her instinct is to push me away, and then it hurts my feelings. That definitely does cause a little bit of stress. That's not the kind of stress that leaves me like sweaty, like I just ran from a lion, tiger, or bear though. That would probably be for me like a near miss in a car accident. Somebody swerves in front of you, you have to slam on the brakes. Whew, you're like huffing and puffing because you almost died. So let's just imagine your most stressful kind of event. Stress hormones trigger an immune system cascade. Those pro-inflammatory cytokines, the cytokine storm, those interleukins, all those things that I was talking about. Those chemicals get produced every time that we reach this peak or we go over that kind of acceptable balance level of a stress response. Then the microorganisms start cross-talking because that enteric neuron is alerting them to what's going on with you systemically. And by the way, this is happening in real time. It's not like a second goes by. It's like simultaneous. It's like the same way that we boot up our computer and send a text message. It is happening fast. This alters then the gut barrier function. And I'll show you a little bit more about gut barrier, but your gut is only one cell layer thick, and it's like a little chain link fence, or almost like little Lego pieces. Those Lego pieces are stacked on top of each other and they fit together really, really, really snugly. But as soon as the stress response happens, your immune system then stimulates enzymes that then break those Legos apart. So they're not actually touching anymore. There's actually space between them. This is what language referring to leaky gut is talking about. It is a conditional response, and it happens to all of us pretty often. Our body is designed to create this like open response in case there is a invader. It is a protective mechanism so that your immune system can get in there to fight it. So our bodies don't really know the difference between a hypothetical threat and a real threat. And so that's where this stress piece and this, kind of modern woo-woo, touchy-feely talk about energy and psychology come into play. It's because your gut is responsible for building and supporting your internal capacity for psychology. But at the same time, we have to underwrite or rewrite our mental capacities, our childhood self, etc., to make sure that we aren't creating these very issues in the first place. So I ask people to think about bacteria differently. Bacteria are symbiotic. They live in us. They are designed to do good things to us. And they live in populations with other bacteria also designed to do those things. They are also opportunistic. And that opportunistic aspect is what ensures their survival. So when microorganisms are being informed or sense our biochemistry respond to, say, stressful stimuli, that stress is known to cause a decrease in gut microbes by 90% because certain organisms that live in our gut start killing them off, thinking that we are going to die as well. At least that has been the narrative proposed by microbiologists that study this. It seems as though E. coli has the capacity to do this. C. diff has the capacity to do this. And certain species of Enterococcus have the capacity to do this. And if you're a healthcare provider, think about when you've seen sepsis in your patients. So these extreme situations of stress, it could be surgery, broke my leg, again, that car accident scenario kind of resonates with me the most. But there's certain species of bacteria that just know that you're hurt, know that you might die, and so they simply kill off the other ones, get into your bloodstream, and try to out-survive you by then jumping ship onto somebody else. This has been found, this mechanism has been found to exist or become common within as little as 6 hours after a traumatic accident. And it was a trauma surgeon in the Midwest that studied this. So this sensing ability, it's referred to as telesensing, but bacteria can intercept signals from us based on our nervous system. And one bacterial species can then send through almost this like wave-like effect, or this text message, if you will, to turn on so many different genes that then apply these epigenetic mechanisms. Epigenetics means that our genes that are, or the cell types that are actively involving and interacting with our environment, then change in subsequent generations. And the other fascinating thing about biology is not only do our own human cell types only live a certain period of time, but bacteria themselves seem to live only about 20 minutes. So they are rapidly evolving and rapidly changing their mechanisms to match or meet the demands of our bodies. So in that context, trust your body, trust your bacteria, learn this information, and then think about how can you optimize it. Again, diet is a good place to start, but in order to really set yourself apart, you also have to do this nervous system work as well. And then quorum sensing. Quorum sensing seems to be how different bacteria communities communicate to each other, and how, within 6 hours of an injury, one bacteria species can then learn from the other one. The more dominant one will win, so to speak. Yep, bacteria produce very quickly with genome changes in as little as 20 minutes, which means that I think microbiome testing is kind of flawed for some people, because it's going to be different and new every time you do it. And it's not necessarily the organisms themselves, but it is their function. So that's why that metatranscriptomics and that metabolomics aspect of where this research is going to apply to you as an individual is that's going to be more important, I think. So there's plenty of opportunities for dysbiosis from these bad bacteria and inflammation. We've already talked about all of these, but I think we're going to be talking about gut barrier function here pretty soon. So the anatomy of digestion: mouth, esophagus, stomach, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, colon. It goes, all of these different defined environments here, they all encompass different environments. So the pH in your mouth is different than that in the esophagus, different than that in the stomach. In fact, the stomach should have a very low pH. It should be very acidic. You want that acid. That acid regulates which bacteria grow in the upper GI tract. You don't want colon species in your small intestine. That causes more inflammation at that microenvironment. When I speak to digestive capacity, I speak to the impact that the parasympathetic nervous system has on getting blood flow to the gut. When blood flows to the gut and your body is in alignment with eating, then you tend to have a better integrity of the mucus layer. And I'll show what the mucus layer is. More digestive enzymes are being released in response to the food that you're eating that actually matches what you're eating. So you have the ability to break down your food better. And then also you have an enhanced movement, bowel movement, or motility, or transit time. So your bowels are also hormonally regulated in terms of their ability to empty. So gut barrier function, this is just another piece of the puzzle. So remember, we were talking about leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. How do you protect yourself against it? Because we're all vulnerable to the stress response. Number one, recognize your stress response and learn behaviors or practices that help bring you back to a state of safety. That's really important. A psychologist could probably help you out with that. But what can we do at the gut level? So these little finger-like projections here are the surface area of the gut membrane. And this is what can be stretched out, can be the size of 2 tennis courts. And then these little yellow dots here, that is what implies those tight junction proteins that, keeps your little Legos together. And if your Legos are nice and tight, then that's wonderful. And again, maintaining good, healthy nervous system balance is one of the best ways to keep your tight junctions together, as far as the research shows us thus far. But on top of that villi, those finger-like projections, is a mucus layer. This mucus layer is really our first mode of defense, second to having healthy organisms that aren't causing dysfunction in the lumen of the intestine. And that's everything from probiotics to that first kind of seeding, if you will, from early childhood. So the mucus layer is this thick green stuff, and its role is to maintain the tight junctions below. So if you were to have a stress response, it's going to help keep that histamine or that mast cell chemical out so that those tight junctions can't get broken. And in order to have a healthy mucus layer, you need to eat lots of fiber. And you should also avoid non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications. That includes aspirin. Aspirin destroys the mucus layer of the gut. That includes ibuprofen, naproxen, among others. But that class of medicines is notorious for breaking apart the mucus layer of the gut, and that's why we can get ulcers if we take too much of this stuff. Fiber helps grow the mucus layer. I can't say that enough. Eat more fiber. And then just a little reflection just about all the different factors that go into play that can disrupt our kind of normal natural gut bacteria population. Remember, this is kind of and the other first line of defense there, what species live in that mucus layer or live just on top of it. So gastric acid, super important. We need stomach acid. In the stomach, we also have more oxygen because we're constantly swallowing air when we eat. That is what also causes us to burp. Motility being how well our bowels empty. This is where pain medicine can really disturb a gut. If we're consuming opiates, it stops our bowels from emptying. Constipation ensues, and then it's like you get an algae bloom in a little, dried up creek bed. You want to keep the river flowing. Mucus, that presence of that mucus layer, GI secretions, all of those digestive enzymes, and then your immune cells here. But these extrinsic factors, whether or not we're taking medications, whether or not we're taking antibiotics kill beneficial species of bacteria. You can recover them, but it's really hard to say the time in which that can happen. And some people, especially our poor cancer patients who have to take antibiotics, have to take chemo, have to have surgery, have to have more antibiotics for surgery, maybe then they have an infection after surgery, it can take them a long time to recover good gut function. I think I'm getting close on time, so I'm going to speed up here a little bit. Okay, so stress physiology. Remember, we have the capacity as humans to worry, create fear, alarm, and we can also have unpleasant communication. We can backtalk, we can feel threatened, we can get in a fight with a spouse. Like I said, one of my most uncomfortable moments right now is watching my toddler melt down. We can also hurt our bodies. Bodily injuries, surgeries are very stressful and do definitely activate the stress response. A diagnosis of cancer would also do that. Loud noises, being chased, being hunted, being attacked, being held down in early childhood. All those things in early childhood would be magnified. How about that? Your limbic brain processes past experiences, memories, instincts, and emotions. Your cortical brain, which is, these are kind of like the three parts of our brain that assess stress or assess threat. Your cortical brain manages the fear response because of our development. So again, as an adult, when something bad happens to us, we can usually recover more quickly than when we're young because we don't really have frontal lobe development. We don't have enough experience. Everything is related to our developmental stage. And then you have a hypothalamus, which regulates that parasympathetic or sympathetic tone and is also connected to the pituitary, which regulates our stress response and all the hormones related to your thyroid function, ovarian function, and adrenal function. So that's your entire endocrine system right there. So all of these things from the brain are impacted. When we have stress coming from the brain, sympathetic nervous system, getting that traumatic car accident, breaking a leg, it releases a corticotropin releasing hormone. In the brain, that stimulates adrenal glands to release cortisol. Just so you know, this is the normal brain to organ kind of hormonal signaling thing. We've known about the HP axis for many decades. It's just this gut piece is kind of new. And when we have that cortisol response, what happens in the body is we see more lymphocytes get produced. Now, what did I say at the very beginning? What's that connection between obesity and cancer? The presence of the lymphocytes in the fat tissue. So they're already there, but the more fat tissue we have, the more lymphocytes we also have. So then imagine if we're overweight and then we get stressed, it's like this whole process is compounded. We increase NF-kappa B, which is one of our cancer-making cytokines. We increase pro-inflammatory cytokines. We increase our helper cells and adhesion molecules, which means we are more prone to blood clots. So the side effect in these hypercortisol states, blood clotting, stroke, heart attacks, arthritis, autoimmune conditions, and cancers. When we have stress-induced gut barrier dysfunction, what we have then is, our gut is the largest density of immune cells. These gut cells in the microbiota also have stress hormone receptors, which means that they continue to make it locally at the gut tissue. This immune activation causes that immune cell, the mast cell, to release an enzyme. It's called chymase, but I'm not going to quiz you later, to break apart those Lego tight junction type proteins. Then you have exposure. So your exposure of your gut tissue to your immune system means that bacteria in the lumen, undigested food particles, this is how people get food sensitivities. This is why people want to blame gluten for everything, because people are eating gluten every day. Increases your immune system to those foods. So we can condition our bodies to then develop this conditioned response to our immune system, to whatever foods we're engaged in this process. Then we also have changes in those metabolites. Remember the butyrate, the propanoate, and the aceto, those short chain fatty acids. The crosstalk from those feeds other species, and because there's usually change for the worse, because our bodies think that we're maybe going to die or going down. I mean, literally your cells, tissues think that. Then there's an increase in those virulence genes, meaning those bacteria that have that survival of the fittest kind of bully type attitude, they will then secrete all of those other cells and cause further imbalances. So your diet is helpful. It's helpful to build this mode of defense, but it's as soon as this mode of defense is activated, then it's like the process is a lot harder to undo. These metabolites cause systemic changes in blood circulation. Boom, all of these things, right? I hope you guys are getting it. This was a study that came out in 2002 that actually was kind of the first documentation of how stress, both psychological stress and physical stress, causes this enhanced intestinal permeability with these stress hormone mechanisms. And what they did is they put rats, science loves watching rats try to drown in beakers of water. It really stresses them out. And then they also put them on a exercise wheel. But the idea was that they stressed them to the point of having supraphysiologic cortisol productions, and then they euthanized the mice, dissected out their colons, and they found colitis. There are epigenetic changes. So these are that metatranscriptomics piece, how the RNA of one population of bacterial species then affects future generations of bacterial species. So all of these stress hormones in the body create changes in as little as 20 minutes, because that's all the longer a bacterial life cycle is. When a bacteria is about to die, it replicates, makes offspring, and then that way those offspring can take its place. That's what humans do too, only we do it with love and compassion and kindness and jobs. But all of biology is really doing the same thing. Memory can develop from these epigenetic changes, which means that the future generations of these stress responses are they're just more prone to respond to that stress. I hope you guys are kind of following along with that. Epigenetics is this process of what happens right now in this moment. Every single cell, every single bacteria, everything that has the capacity to be alive and to reproduce remembers this epigenetic change, remembers what's going on, and then its genome changes. So that's part of that inheritability connection. So in order to really have this healthy gut-brain axis, reduce our risk of cancer, reduce our risk of obesity, reduce our risk of type 2 diabetes, it's going to take many public health efforts to optimize maternal health care, optimize birth modes and reseeding, right? A C-section is a fantastic thing when it's needed. All we need to do is maintain that, keep the baby alive, and then help that baby inoculate themselves with the right kind of bacteria to then set their immune system up on a more favorable trajectory. Once we are parents and can shop and buy food, etc., we need to also learn that we can make choices and that these choices have this big of an impact on our entire body. We need to be present and alert to stress. We need to learn how to mitigate chronic stress and maintain homeostasis. I always tell people we are wired for stress. We are wired to look for it, we are wired to recognize it, and we are also wired to have the capacity to bring ourselves back to safety. When we can do that, we operate in that hormetic region of this is healthy, this is good, and it's okay to feel the full spectrum of life, swing to one extreme, and then to be able to come back to the other. Disease doesn't happen just because we left the line of balance, but health is our ability to come back and to come back again and again. So a healthy gut microbiome balance promotes anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, improved gut barrier function, and improved short-chain fatty acid balance. And I told you I was going to give butyrate an honorable mention. And I know I'm at an hour. So butyrate is just this fascinating thing that impacts both brain, both cancer, and all of these different mechanisms that reduce tumor growth. And I'm not going to read the slide because I want to stay mindful of the time. If anybody can interrupt me if I'm going over. Just a friendly reminder, every time we eat, your microbes eat. Prebiotics are food, plant-based foods. Polyphenols are all the colors of the rainbow. All those antioxidants also help bacteria. And so it's just important to eat a wide variety of plant-based foods. The American Human Gut Project did a big survey and found that those with the healthiest gut environments ate upwards of 30 different plants a week. It might sound like a tall order at first, but just start observing. Every day, write down all the plants that you eat. Think about the herbs. Think about all of your fruits and vegetables. Think about your nuts, your seeds, your whole grains. It's actually much easier than you think. Probiotics, in my opinion, you don't need to eat a capsule. You don't need to spend a lot of money on this stuff. If you grow your own garden, you're getting plenty of probiotics. You can help promote bacterial balance with probiotics. I call it like a fertilizer, if you will. They are naturally in our soil, they're naturally in our ocean water, they're naturally airborne. In fact, if you make your own fermented foods at home, all you need is a little filtered water, a little salt, and exposure to a little bit of your own atmosphere, your own air, and all these plant foods and even dairy will spontaneously ferment. Sauerkraut, yogurt, kefir, miso, kimchi, tempeh, dosas, sourdough bread, all of these things are helpful. And a postbiotic is just those short-chain fatty acids there. You cannot supplement with short-chain fatty acids, at least it has not been reproduced in research studies yet to have a positive benefit. So it's kind of, you got to do the whole thing, the whole package. And just digestion is important. I think I hit that point home pretty good. Okay. So if you guys are hungry for more, I talk a lot about gut health. I talk a lot about these mechanisms. And if what you learned today piqued your interest even just a little bit, I give a free 4-part lecture series. It's available on my website. You can go to lavellayourguts.com. And then I send out emails every now and then too and let you know when I'm doing presentations like this. You can keep learning. And lots of references. I have read them all, and it's a never-ending pursuit of happiness of mine to keep reading gut microbiome research. And okay, so with that, let's start answering some questions or
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. La Vella, for your presentation today. It was so informative. It does look like we have a couple questions in the chat box right now. We were asked, how does weight loss surgery impact all of the body systems, just like you talked about?
Yeah. Insulin resistance, day one. So that's really cool. And also in terms of the gastric bypass, so they do different things, the gastric bypass and then the sleeve gastrectomy. The gastric bypass tends to have favorable microbiome changes that foster bile acid metabolism. So that's a whole other lecture someday. But our ability to regulate bile and then kind of recycle it through the body, that's really good for liver health. So a gastric bypass tends to have more mechanisms of action with that. It also does things significantly to change the pH of the intestine that, in my opinion, aren't always favorable long term. It kind of depends on a person's lifestyle and how disciplined they are to eat a whole foods diet. Because when you don't have much acid in the upper GI tract, you can be a setup for that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. In a sleeve gastrectomy, same thing. There is a dramatic improvement in insulin sensitivity. And then both operations just afford reduction in that general adiposity and that general lowered adipokine picture. So bariatric surgery is shown to have a 56% reduction in all solid organ cancer development. It's also associated with a 92% reduction in all-cause mortality related to type 2 diabetes. So there are a lot of benefits that come from weight loss. In terms of the gut environment itself, it's all dependent on the diet, the stress response, and usually our bariatric patients are told to never take NSAIDs ever again. And I think that is a big improvement in their picture long term.
Wow, such a interesting answer for that. We did have a couple questions before the presentation. Can you touch on the BRCA2 cancer gene and it contribute to weight gain?
Yeah, I didn't come across any evidence for that. So there definitely are some genes that are associated with obesity, but there's so many people out there who suffer from obesity that don't have those genetic markers either. So I'm not sure yet. I'll answer with that.
No, thank you so much for clarifying. And we'll just have one last question. Is it true that cancer cannot thrive in an alkaline environment? And if that is true, should I eat more foods that are alkaline based?
I've always thought the alkaline arguments were a little bit bogus, only because the body is so densely regulated. In other words, your blood has a very narrow pH range, and if you get much higher than 7.4, then bad things start to happen. So the body it's very hard to disrupt pH in the body. You have to be sick, you have to have sepsis, and you can't really push yourself beyond alkaline at a physiologic level. So I think, alkaline foods, I think that's also interesting, but you also need to have an acidic gastrointestinal environment or acidic stomach environment. The role of digestion is to immediately neutralize that acid once it gets into your small intestine. Without acid, you cannot digest protein. That is its main role, is to help you digest protein. And protein, not necessarily animal protein, but is also one of the most important building blocks for everything in the body. But we can get most of our protein needs or all of our protein needs met from eating plant-based foods. If those are considered alkaline, I think that's fantastic. When you Google or reference what an alkaline diet is, it's a really healthy one. So I don't know if you can necessarily prevent cancer based on that alone, based on everything I just shared with you today. But I don't think that eating alkaline, I don't think it's going to have a big impact on your ability to regulate your pH.
Thank you so much for the clarification on that. So if there is any remaining questions, you can feel free to email us at cancerresourcecenter@samhealth.org. So if we didn't get to them today, we can definitely follow up with you regarding those questions. We are going to send out a link for an evaluation. Please take a moment to complete this evaluation. It really helps us to provide valuable feedback for our future events. And once again, I just would really